Okay, students, let's focus on dividing integers today. We've worked on adding, subtracting, and multiplying so far. And so let's look. I've come up with a couple examples here I want to look at. And so let's look at our first one, and we're just starting with positives. Okay, I know you already know the answer to this. You know that 15 divided by 3 is 5, but let's talk about what it means. Okay, we have a positive 15, so I've already gone ahead and put 15 positive integer counters on there. And if we're dividing it by 3, we're putting it into groups of 3. Okay, or I'm sorry, we're putting it into 3 equal groups is how we can look at it. So I'm going to draw a box around each of our 3 groups that are separated out. So we have 3 groups and there's 5 in each group. Okay, well, if you think about it, dividing is the opposite of multiplying. So you will notice that we could say 3 times 5 is 15, which is the opposite of 15 divided by 3 is 5. Okay, you will notice that we took a positive and we divided it into 3 groups. So that's a positive, and we ended up with a positive. Just like when we were multiplying, a positive times a positive gives us a positive. Okay, now let's say that we've got 15 negatives to start out with. Okay, so negative 15 divided by 3. So I have 15 negatives drawn out here. And we're going to, again, divide it into 3 groups. So let's just draw a squiggly line around these. There's 1. There's 2. And there's our 3 groups. And you will notice that in each group, there are 5, but this time they're negative. Negative 5. So negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5. Okay. And so we could rewrite that as 3 times negative 5 equals negative 15. Okay. You will notice that when we were dividing, we had a negative and a positive, and we got a negative, which is the same as if we have multiply and we're multiplying a positive and a negative. So one of each, we get a negative. Okay, let's look at our last one here. This one's a little more difficult to explain, but it says negative 15 divided by negative 3. So I have 15 negative integer counters here, and let's put them into groups of 3 negatives. Let's think of it that way. So here is a group of 3 negatives. Here is a group of 3 negatives. I'm going to keep doing that. And when we start looking at our groups of 3 negatives, you're going to notice that we have 5 groups. Okay, 5 positive groups there, 5 groups. Okay, so a negative 15 divided by a negative 3 gives us a positive 5. Okay, well, if we look at it, that's the opposite there. We've got a negative divided by a negative is a positive, which just like in multiplication, if you do a negative times a negative, you get a positive. Okay, so it still is a true statement if we look at it backwards. So since multiplying and dividing are opposites, in this case, their rules turn out to be the same. So we have the same rules as multiplying. And that makes it really nice and convenient when you go to remember this. So let's just kind of write a summary of the rules on here. Okay, if you're dividing, two positives, I'm going to abbreviate, your answer is positive. Okay, and when we look at this one, if we're dividing 2 negatives in our third example, a negative divided by a negative gives us a positive. So if you're dividing 2 negatives, you get a positive. And then our middle example, example 2, shows us what happens if we have one of each. So if you are dividing a negative and a positive, your answer is negative. All right, well, if you look at those rules, those are the same as, again, multiplying. And so we can use the song for that. So if we do it to the tune of Jingle Bells, okay, then a positive divided by a positive gives us a positive. A negative divided by a negative gives us a positive. A negative divided by a positive gives us a negative. And a positive divided by a negative gives us a negative. Okay, so all you have to do is do your division. So like if I have 20 divided by 4, let's see here, and let's make that a negative 20 divided by 4. 20 divided by 4 is 5, and a negative divided by a positive gives me a negative. So it's just like the multiplying, only you do the division. Now, let's look at a couple other types of problems because you're going to have some of these on your assignment today. And on these, you're going to be asked to find the average of some numbers. And so let's just quickly review how to find the average of something. First, you add up the numbers. Okay, so you add them up and you get your answer, and then you divide by how many numbers you have. So if you have a list of 7 numbers, you would divide by 7. If you have a list of 3 numbers, you would divide by 3. So we're going to look at 3 quick examples here. In example 1, let's say that we have the numbers 15, 5, and 10, and we want the average of those. So my first step is I'm going to add them. 15 plus 5 plus 10. 15 plus 5 is 20, and 20 plus 10 is 30. Okay, so that's my first step. My second step is I'm going to divide, so 30 is going to be divided by, there were 3 numbers. And so when we do 30 divided by 3, we end up with 10 as our final answer for our average. Okay, let's go to number 2. Let's put some negative numbers in there. Let's say that we have negative 10, negative 2, negative 3, and negative 1. So we're going to add those numbers up. Now we need to be careful because we're going to have to remember our addition rules. So we're adding negative 10 plus negative 2 plus negative 3 plus negative 1. In this case, all of the numbers are negative, so I'm really just adding the numbers up. Okay, a negative 10 and a negative 2 gives me negative 12. Okay, and then if I wanted to pair these up, a negative 3 plus a negative 1 is a negative 4. And then I'm adding a negative 12 plus a negative 4, and that gets me negative 16. So for my first step, I've added. Okay, I have a negative answer. And then I'm going to do negative 16 divided by, we had 4 numbers that we were finding the average of, so we're going to divide it by 4. Okay, now we're going to use the division rules here. 16 divided by 4 is 4, and a negative divided by a positive gives us a negative. So the average of these 4 numbers is negative 4. All right, let's look at one final example here. Let's combine some positives and negatives together here. Okay, let's say that we have negative 40, 15, negative 10, 25, and negative 20. Okay. All right, so we have 5 numbers there. And really, I'll be honest, I think the easiest thing to do is to group them. So I'm going to choose to notice that there are two numbers that are positive that I could add together easily. So I could do 15 plus 25, so I'm going to group those. And then I'm going to notice that the other three numbers are negative, so I'm going to choose to group those together, whether you're writing it down or doing it in your head. Okay. Now, if they're both positive, I'm just going to add and keep the positive sign. So we get positive 40 for those numbers. Okay. Now, these three negatives, since they're all negative, I'm just going to add them up and keep the negative sign. Okay, so I have 40 and 10 is 50, plus 20 is 70, and they're all negative. So if I'm using my addition rules, now I have a positive 40 and a negative 70. So again, I'm going back to using my addition rules. Okay, I look to notice, do I have more positives or more negatives? I actually have more negatives in this problem, and I'm trying to figure out how many more negatives. So in my mind, I'm saying 70 minus 40, that's 30. Okay, so there are 30 more negatives. Okay, so our answer for the addition part of this is negative 30. Now we're not finished because that's just the adding. Now to get our final answer, we're going to take the negative 30 and we're going to divide it. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers there. So we're dividing it by 5. 30 divided by 5 is 6. And a negative divided by a positive is a negative. So the average of those 5 numbers is a negative 6. So good luck on the assignment. If you have any questions, I will be on conference tomorrow from 9:20, or I'm sorry, today, from 9:20 to 12:20. All right, thanks.